Election battle over Brexit. Labour vows to protect the rights of EU nationals. The party says it will prioritise jobs and workers' rights and calls government plans rigid. But on a visit to Wales, Theresa May dismisses Labour's plans as nonsensical. Also tonight, Madeleine McCann's mother on the stolen 10 years since she went missing. Multi-million-pound payouts by the Mirror to the victims of phone hacking. And Team GB's golden couple on their latest honours.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Election battle lines were drawn over Brexit today, with Labour and the Conservatives clashing over their rival plans. Labour pledged to guarantee the future of all EU nationals living in the UK and promised Parliament a final say. But they conceded freedom of movement would have to end. Theresa May dismissed Labour's plans as nonsensical and said it was Jeremy Corbyn's 7th attempt to come up with a clear policy. Our political correspondent Emily Morgan reports on the battle over Brexit.
This was the moment Labour hoped to silence its critics and give us their plan for Brexit. The Prime Minister claims it's the reason she called the election, and the opposition need to persuade voters they have a strategy. Step up, Sir Keir Starmer.
On day one of a Labour government, we will immediately guarantee that all EU nationals currently living in the UK will see no change in their legal status as a result of Brexit. Day one, big commitment.
He also admitted freedom of movement would have to end, but suggested EU citizens could get preferential treatment. So how do the two main parties' Brexit policies measure up? Labour will guarantee the rights of EU citizens in the UK straight away, whereas the Conservatives insist it is a priority in negotiations. Labour will give MPs a veto over any Brexit deal, something the Conservatives aren't offering. And Labour wants to retain the benefits of the single market while prioritising trade deals with the EU. Theresa May, however, says we'll have to leave both the single market and the customs union. But what would happen if no deal is reached? Sir Keir later was clear they'd go back to the negotiating table.
I don't think having a second referendum is the way forward here. We've said that you've got to accept the result and get on with negotiating. This idea the Prime Minister has that if in the autumn of 2018 there isn't sufficient support for her approach, she simply won't go back and negotiate, even though she's got time to do so. That's a political decision that she's taken. I think it's the wrong decision.
She was in a metalworks in South Wales today trying to steal votes in the Labour heartlands. Brexit, she says, is her turf, and she wants voters to know it.
What we've seen today from Labour is, I think, their 7th Brexit plan. It's yet another nonsensical Jeremy Corbyn plan for the future in terms of Brexit.
The Liberal Democrats insist they're the only party with a clear alternative to the Conservatives.
That's the choice. Do you accept that hard Brexit vision or you don't? The Liberal Democrats don't. And even after all the muddled clarifications from Labour today, it's clear that Labour basically agree with Theresa May.
It's fair to say Labour have clarified their position on Brexit today. The question is whether it's enough to woo voters on both sides of the argument. Emily Morgan, ITV News in Westminster.
And our political editor Robert Peston joins us now. Now, Robert, a week ago the Prime Minister called the election over Brexit. Is it now clear, do you think, where each party stands on that issue?
Well, the central issue is our relationship with Europe's single market and customs union. That's the arrangement which allows our companies to trade with Europe with no costs. The Tory position is that it wants to replicate as many of the benefits of membership as possible, but is not prepared to compromise by continuing with free movement of people or the rule of the ECJ. Labour's position is it would compromise rather more than the Tories would. And the Liberal Democrat position is they want to remain members of the single market and therefore on those sorts of issues would compromise completely. I suppose this could be boiled down to Theresa May saying, trust me, I'm the person who will deliver real Brexit. Labour saying, well, her Brexit could be a bit harsh. And the Lib Dems saying, actually, we don't really like Brexit at all.
Robert Preston at Westminster, thank you. Kate McCann says the 10th anniversary of her daughter Madeleine's disappearance is a horrible marker of stolen time. But she says the family will always hope that she's alive. And the Portuguese officer leading the investigation has told ITV News they will never give up searching for Madeleine. From Praia de Luz, Martin Geisler reports.
Her face has become so familiar, but for 10 dark years, Madeleine McCann's parents have had to live without their daughter. Next Wednesday, it'll be a decade since Madeleine disappeared. Ahead of that anniversary, her mother Kate posted a message on social media today. Most days are similar to the rest, she said. Another day. May the 3rd, 2017, another day. But 10 years, a horrible marker of time. Stolen time. Years of revenue and resource have been poured into the search for this one little girl, and still no firm leads. But the officer in charge of the Portuguese investigation told me there are no plans to close the file.
It's not really a question of nationality, it's a question of a missing child. And of course I think that the Portuguese public expect the police judiciary to do whatever it can to solve one case like this.
Not everyone sees it that way. The investigation was closed back in 2008. It stayed shut for 5 years. Former Attorney General Pinto Montero was the man who made that decision. It was going nowhere, he said, and nothing's changed.
I ruled we should only reopen the case when new, relevant, credible facts come to light. 10 years on, as far as I know, we still don't have any. We can't just keep on investigating for investigation's sake.
In Praia de Luz, they're preparing for another summer season. The town is trying to move on, but reminders are never far away. There's barely an inch of this town that hasn't been searched or examined over the past 10 years. Large areas have been excavated, but still, somehow, a decade on, we're no closer to knowing what happened in this apartment that night. The only solace the McCann family can take from this is a promise from all those involved that they'll keep working for as long as it takes. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Portugal.
Here, Mirror Group Newspapers has paid out record-breaking damages to victims of phone hacking, it emerged today. 40 celebrities, including Lord Archer, Patsy Kensit and Kevin Keegan, have been given compensation as they settled claims against the publisher. Well, Rebecca Barry is here. Record-breaking, multi-million and all that. What sort of sums are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about substantial sums. But what happened at the High Court today really illustrates the scale of the phone hacking that was taking place at the Daily Mirror, the Sunday Mirror and the People. This afternoon, more than 40 individuals, including politicians, TV personalities, actors, settled their cases with undisclosed damages and an apology. They include former footballer Kevin Keegan, comedian Vic Reeves, the actress Patsy Kensit and the singer Sophie Ellis-Bextor. It's thought some of the settlements could exceed the record £260,000 that was awarded to the actress Sadie Frost in 2015. So far, Mirror Group Newspapers has set aside £52.5 million to deal with these claims. And in court today, we heard that Kevin Keegan was left shocked and appalled when he found out he'd been hacked, and Patsy Kensit was caused unnecessary distress during the breakdown of her marriage to Liam Gallagher. But this is not all over yet. More cases are working their way through the courts.
OK, interesting stuff, Rebecca. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on now, Nestlé is planning to cut almost 300 jobs in the UK while moving production of one of its biggest biscuit brands to Poland. The confectionery giant will make the cuts over the next 2 years at its sites in York, Newcastle, Halifax and Govan in Scotland. And a woman who conned a blind war veteran with dementia out of his life savings has been jailed for 5.5 years. Veronica Robinson pretended to be the man's cleaner and convinced him to write her cheques in excess of £180,000. Relatives of soldiers killed in the IRA bomb attack in Hyde Park today brought their long fight for justice to Westminster. They want financial support for legal action against the chief suspect in the 1982 attack. John Downey's trial sensationally collapsed 3 years ago, as Neil Connery reports.
Nearly 35 years on, some of the victims' families and one of the survivors of the IRA Hyde Park bombing came to Parliament in their fight for justice. But first they remembered those killed and injured in last month's Westminster attack. The Hyde Park bombing was one of the worst IRA atrocities on the mainland. A car bomb packed with nails was detonated remotely as the Royal Household Cavalry rode past. 4 soldiers were killed. Trooper Simon Tipper was just 19.
He was a really, really nice lad. I loved him. I really did love him, and he shouldn't have been took away from us. He shouldn't.
John Downey, a convicted IRA member, went on trial for the killings in 2014, but it collapsed when he produced an official letter telling him he was no longer wanted for any crime. It was sent mistakenly as part of deals struck over the peace process. He's always denied being responsible. Some of the victims' families are now having to raise funds to bring a private case.
It's the help we deserve instead of letting us, as families, resort to begging. They ought to feel ashamed of themselves, seeing families like this who've had the worst atrocity you can imagine done to them.
At the Hyde Park bombing memorial, the fight for justice goes on. Neil Connery, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, fighting famine in Somaliland. We return to witness a land where the drought is continuing to take its toll.
It's hard to escape the conclusion that several weeks on from when we were last here, the situation is far worse.
Well, that special report from Raggy and the rest of the day's news after the break. Join me then. Hello and welcome back. Last night we reported how almost 200,000 children in Somalia could die from a combination of starvation and cholera. But the situation is equally dire in Somaliland, which is also on the brink of famine. International aid is struggling to get through, despite £50 million having been raised by Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee. Earlier this year, our International Affairs editor, Raggy Omar, highlighted the suffering in the territory, which has declared independence from Somalia. In the latest part of our Fighting Famine series, he's returned to find people more desperate than ever.
As soon as you step into Somaliland's only therapeutic malnutrition clinic, and the scale of the tragedy gripping this country hits you. I was last here less than 2 months ago. Back then, every bed was filled with sick and hungry children and their desperate mothers. But today, there are so many cases that doctors have resorted to laying them on the hospital floor. The cases of malnutrition are more severe now than before. Hamda is 18 months old. She's 18-year-old Nawal's only child. After 11 days being on the edge of death, she is now stable. Though looking at her painfully frail body, it's hard to believe that. Dr. Khader showed me around these very same wards back in March. He says he and his colleagues have reached the limit of what they can do.
We need medicine as well as infrastructure, because we can't
cope anymore.
Yeah, we cannot cope anymore.
We return to eastern Somaliland, the area hardest hit by the worst drought in 2 centuries. Here too, we found a deteriorating situation. The final hope that rains would come this month has failed for the 3rd year running. The 1.5 million nomads who rely on livestock have seen over 10 million animals lost to the drought. The last few they have are now dying. Makeshift camps for those displaced by the drought spring up by the sides of roads between towns and cities. The small amounts of food donated by local businessmen and religious leaders is currently the only lifeline this camp has to stave off hunger. People in nearby towns have also donated a few trucks of water to these destitute nomads, but the wells which were dug for them are now dry, and people don't know when or if the local community is able to donate more.
The number of displaced camps has increased, as have the number of desperate families fleeing here. And yet when they arrive, they find no water, no food and very basic shelter. It's hard to escape the conclusion that several weeks on from when we were last here, the situation is far worse.
As we drove back, we were stopped by worried villagers carrying a man struck by cholera. It's what everyone feared 2 months ago, that we'd see the outbreak of deadly diseases that would soon start taking lives. We called an ambulance and he was taken to hospital. A few hours ago, we learned he is critical but stable. Severe drought now teeters on the edge of famine. Emergency supplies in Somaliland's threadbare clinics have never been more desperately or more urgently needed. Ragioma, ITV News, Somaliland.
Well, for more information on the famine in East Africa and to find out where the DEC appeal money is going, log on to our website at itv.com/news. François Hollande has honoured the police officer killed by an Islamist extremist at a ceremony in Paris today. Javier Huguelet died when an attacker fired on a police van on the Champs-Élysées. Presidential candidates Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen were among the mourners. And Ivanka Trump spoke alongside the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the IMF chief Christine Lagarde at a summit in Berlin. It is her first foreign outing as a White House advisor. Now, working families will once again be a key target group in June's general election. But what do they want from the main parties? Well, all this week we're hearing the views of people across the UK. Tonight, Emma Murphy reports from Darlington, Labour's heartland, but also an area where the Conservatives will be hoping to take seats. Well, there she spoke to families about what matters to them in the election.
2 bucks of raspberry 150, 2 bucks of blueberry 150.
Darlington, a typical English market town which for a quarter of a century has been staunchly Labour but is now in Tory sights. So what matters to the voters here, to the parents whose children's young lives will be affected by the next government? Sarah Travis is a financial advisor. As chair of her children's school PTA, she wants a stop to budget cuts in education. As a mum, she wants help to work and raise children.
No parent has enough holidays from work to be able to cover holiday cover when the children are off school. And I'd like to see the 30 hours free childcare being rolled out to be used in holiday time as well as term time.
Telecoms consultant Andrew Taylor fears budget cuts could leave his children without the chances he had.
We should be investing in our children. It's the most important thing because eventually those would be the people running the country and working in jobs. And without education, employment is very, very competitive at the moment.
Yoga teacher Rachel Pearson's children are aged from 2 to 18. She's clear what she wants for the next generation of voters.
Opportunities for further education, so college, university, apprenticeships, basically just meeting the individual needs of different young adults.
As a French teacher for infants, Lucy Cass is fearful of the effects of Brexit.
I want a good deal for us so that we can trade well with other European countries and we can also still have the opportunity to live, work and travel, to do that easily. Help me count in French. What do we say?
So this election may bring change in Darlington, but perhaps the old adage remains. And from the mouth of at least one babe, the most honest assessment of all the talk of politics. Emma Murphy, ITV News, Darlington.
And finally, they may have more Olympic golds than any other British couple, but Jason and Laura Kenny said receiving CBEs at Buckingham Palace today was something special. The pair were honoured for services to cycling, and they told Sally Lockwood how they're looking forward to their biggest challenge yet, parenthood.
Jason and Laura Kenny have 10 Olympic golds between them. They'll soon have a baby, and they now even have his and hers CBEs, presented to them today by Princess Anne.
She asked why me and Jason weren't going in there together, which was funny. But it's nice because obviously she comes from a sporting background, so she understands it. She said she thought that it must be odd for me to be having a break because obviously we're having a baby. So it's nice for her to, recognise that and actually know what it's like.
The royals, along with the country, have followed this couple's career. Their romance emerging amid their haul of medals at London 2012. Then last year, the couple took home another 5 golds in Rio before marrying in September. And with their sights firmly on their next challenge, parenthood, Jason is even considering retirement before Tokyo 2020.
Anything's possible, I suppose. It's quite a long way to Tokyo now, so I haven't made my mind up, to be honest.
Could it be daddy daycare instead?
Well, I'll have to do something, obviously.
Everyone was like, oh, how are you going to top last year? Obviously, we got married, and it's like, well, now we're having a baby, so it's going to top it.
At just 25 and 29 years old, they've certainly achieved enough for a career break. But with a baby on the way, it's unlikely they'll struggle for things to do. Sally Lockwood, ITV News, Buckingham Palace.
And that is all for now. Tom Bradby's here with news at 10, but from me and all the team, have a great evening. Bye-bye.